I received the wedding invitation on a Tuesday morning, and at first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. The envelope was thick, white, and expensive, with my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. I opened it while sitting alone in my office, expecting an invitation to some business event or perhaps a friend's celebration. Instead, I found a beautifully designed card with two names printed in elegant letters: Olivia Reed and Marcus Blake. I read those names several times before my brain finally accepted what my eyes were seeing. My wife was getting married to my best friend, and somehow I had been invited. The date was 3 weeks away. I leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly. It wasn't because anything was funny. Sometimes shock makes you react in ways you don't understand. Olivia and I had been married for 6 years. Marcus had been my closest friend since college. We had built our architecture company together from nothing. We had worked in a tiny rented office, eaten cheap food, and dreamed about becoming successful. I had trusted him more than I trusted most members of my own family. I called Olivia immediately. She answered after 3 rings. "Hi, Nathan." Her voice was strangely calm. I placed the invitation on my desk. "You forgot to tell me something." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "You found it." "Found what?" "The invitation." My stomach tightened. "Are you cheating on me?" Another silence followed. Then she said, "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. Those 2 words were enough. "Why?" I asked. "This isn't about love," she whispered. "Then what is it about?" "I can't explain." "Try." She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Marcus promised he could save us." "Save us from what?" Before she could respond, the call ended. I immediately called Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I looked down at the invitation again. At the bottom was a small company logo belonging to Blake Holdings, Marcus's father's corporation. Suddenly, something felt wrong. This wasn't simply an affair. It wasn't simply a marriage. It was something much bigger. Someone had been planning something behind my back, and I had been the only person who didn't know. I picked up the invitation and stared at Marcus's name. For the first time in 15 years, I wondered whether my best friend had ever actually been my friend. The following morning, I arrived at the office before everyone else. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about Olivia's words and the strange logo on the invitation. Our company had been successful for years. We designed hotels, luxury homes, corporate buildings, and large commercial projects. Marcus handled most of the financial side while I focused on architecture and development. I had never questioned him because I believed trust was more important than paperwork. That morning, I opened our financial records and immediately noticed something unusual. $3 million had been transferred from one of our corporate accounts to a private investment firm. The transaction looked completely legitimate, but the recipient company was owned by Richard Blake, Marcus's father. I checked another account. $2 million were missing there. Then another million. $6 million had disappeared in total. I called Evelyn, my assistant, and asked her to come into my office. She arrived 10 minutes later carrying a notebook. When I showed her the transactions, her expression changed immediately. "You know something," I said. She looked down. "Nathan, I was going to tell you." "When?" She hesitated. "I don't know." "Evelyn, look at me." She finally did. "Marcus has been moving money for almost a year." I stood up. "Why?" "I don't know." "You're lying." Her eyes filled with tears. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of company agreements. I recognized the documents, but something was wrong. My signature appeared on them. I had supposedly agreed to reduce my ownership from 50% to 12%. I had never signed them. "These are forged," I whispered. Evelyn nodded. "Marcus did it." I sat down slowly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "He threatened me." "With what?" "My brother. He knows where he works. He said he could destroy his career. I stared at the documents again. Suddenly, the wedding invitation made sense. Marcus wasn't marrying Olivia because he loved her. The marriage was part of the story they wanted everyone to believe. Nathan Reed had supposedly lost control of his company, lost his wife, and disappeared. Marcus would become the successful businessman who took over. Olivia would become his wife, and I would become the man everyone pitied. "How much evidence do you have?" I asked. Evelyn took a deep breath. "Enough to prove what they're doing." I looked at the wedding invitation. Then I looked at her. "Good." She frowned. "What are you thinking?" I smiled for the first time since opening the envelope. "I'm going to let them believe their plan is working." Evelyn stared at me. And then I folded the invitation and placed it inside my desk. Then I'm going to show up at that wedding. For the next 2 weeks, I became the man Marcus expected me to be. I stopped asking questions. I stopped arguing. I acted confused, tired, and defeated. When Marcus brought documents into my office, I signed some of them without protest, but every page went directly to my lawyer afterward. When Olivia called, I answered politely. I never accused her. I never asked about the wedding. I simply told her that I needed time to think. She seemed relieved. That was exactly what I wanted. Meanwhile, Evelyn and my lawyer started building a case. Every transaction was documented. Every forged signature was compared with genuine examples. Every suspicious email was preserved. Every conversation was handled carefully and legally. Then I disappeared. I left the city and checked into a small hotel near the coast. Marcus believed I had gone away to clear my head. Olivia believed I was emotionally broken. Neither knew where I actually was. Every few days, Evelyn visited me with more evidence. One evening, she arrived carrying a laptop. "I found something," she said. I opened it. A video file was already playing. Marcus was sitting in a private room with his father. Olivia was sitting beside him. My heart tightened as I listened. "Once Nathan signs the final agreement, he owns almost nothing," Marcus said. Richard laughed. "And Olivia?" Marcus smiled. "She'll marry me. Everyone will think Nathan lost everything because he couldn't handle the company." Olivia remained silent. Then she asked, "What happens to him?" Marcus looked at his father. "He'll leave. He won't have a reason to stay." I watched the recording twice. The second time, I noticed something I had missed before. Richard placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents connected to several other companies. My company wasn't their only target. They had been using the same strategy against other businesses. Richard would secretly acquire debts, Marcus would manipulate company owners, and then Blake Holdings would take control when those businesses collapsed. I looked at Evelyn. "How many companies?" "At least 7. I felt anger rising inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. "This isn't just about me." "No," she said. "It's much bigger." I called my lawyer. He listened carefully while I explained what we had found. When I finished, he said, "Nathan, if this evidence is authentic, they could face serious charges. Then we need to make sure they can't destroy it." He promised to secure everything. I looked through the hotel window at the ocean. 2 weeks earlier, I had thought my life was over. Now I realized something different. They hadn't destroyed my life. They had given me a reason to finally see the truth. I wasn't going to fight Marcus with anger. I was going to let his own lies destroy him. 3 weeks after receiving the invitation, I returned to the city. The wedding was being held in the largest hotel downtown. Hundreds of guests were expected. Business partners, investors, politicians, wealthy families, and everyone else who wanted to be seen around the Blake family. I arrived shortly before the ceremony began. Nobody recognized me at first. I stood near the entrance wearing a black suit and watched the room. Olivia was wearing a white dress. Marcus stood beside her, smiling confidently. Richard was speaking to several investors. Everything looked perfect. Then the music started. Olivia walked toward the stage, and Marcus turned toward the audience. His smile disappeared the moment he saw me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. "Nathan?" he whispered. I smiled. "Congratulations." Olivia looked like she couldn't breathe. "Nathan, please." I raised my hand. "Don't." The guests began whispering. Marcus walked toward me. "What are you doing here?" I held up the invitation. "You invited me. You shouldn't be here." "That's interesting. Your invitation says otherwise." Richard approached quickly. "This is a private event." I looked directly at him. "Not for much longer." His expression changed. Then the ballroom doors opened. My lawyer entered with several attorneys and investigators. Marcus stepped backward. "What's happening?" My lawyer placed a folder on the nearest table. "We have evidence of financial fraud, document forgery, illegal transfers, and conspiracy." Marcus laughed nervously. "You have nothing." I looked toward Evelyn. She stepped forward and connected her laptop to the ballroom screen. "Actually," she said, "we have everything." The first video appeared. Marcus watched himself discussing my destruction. Then another video played. Richard was shown discussing the financial transfers. Then the bank records appeared. Then the forged documents. Then messages between Olivia and Marcus. The room became completely silent. Marcus turned toward Olivia. "You said those files were deleted." Olivia started crying. "You said everything was under control." Richard shouted at everyone to turn the screen off. Nobody listened. The investigators moved toward him. Marcus tried to leave, but security blocked the doors. "Nathan," he shouted. "You don't understand." I looked at him calmly. "I understand perfectly." He stared at me. "We were brothers." I shook my head. "No, Marcus. Brothers don't do this." He lowered his head. The investigators arrested him before the ceremony could continue. Richard was taken away for questioning. Olivia remained standing alone in her wedding dress. She looked at me through tears. I felt no satisfaction, no excitement, just exhaustion. For months I had imagined this moment as revenge. But standing there, surrounded by people watching the destruction of everything I had once trusted, I realized revenge wasn't what I actually wanted. I wanted the truth, and now everyone had finally seen it. Marcus was arrested that afternoon, but the story didn't end there. My lawyer called me the next morning and told me there was another problem. Richard Blake had been manipulating companies for years. Marcus wasn't the mastermind. He was simply the person Richard trusted to carry out the plans. Richard had secretly acquired shares in businesses connected to ours, taken control of their debts, and forced owners into desperate agreements. My company was only one piece of a much larger operation. The investigators found enough evidence to freeze several accounts. But there was another danger. Richard still controlled major assets, including shares connected to my company. If those shares remained in his hands, he could continue interfering with my business even from outside. So I made a decision. I would buy them. I spent the next month working with investors and lawyers. I acquired every share Richard was willing to sell. Then I purchased several outstanding debts attached to Blake Holdings. I didn't attack him illegally. I didn't threaten him. I simply removed the financial support holding his empire together. One morning, my phone rang. It was Richard. "You did this," he said. I looked through my office window. "No, your decisions did this. You ruined my company. You built it on stolen money." His voice became furious. "I will destroy you." I smiled. "You already tried." Then I ended the call. Within months, Blake Holdings collapsed. Investors walked away. Contracts disappeared. Banks demanded repayment. The company that had once seemed untouchable became a warning to everyone in the industry. Meanwhile, my own company survived and grew stronger. But I changed everything. I created new financial controls. No single person could move large amounts of money without independent approval. Every ownership agreement required multiple signatures. Every employee received clear documentation of their rights. I never wanted another person to experience what I had experienced. Evelyn became one of my most trusted partners. She had risked her career to help me, and I made sure she was rewarded for it. One evening, she came into my office carrying a letter. "It's from Marcus." I opened it. He was serving his sentence and had written only a few lines. He said he had spent years believing my success should have been his. He admitted that jealousy had destroyed everything. At the bottom, he wrote, "I thought taking your life would make mine better." I folded the letter. Evelyn asked if I wanted to respond. I shook my head. No. Why? I looked at the city outside. Because my life doesn't belong to him anymore. That was the first time I understood that I had finally won. 6 months passed before I saw Olivia again. One evening, she appeared outside my office. She looked completely different. The expensive clothes were gone. So was the confidence she once carried everywhere. She looked tired. "Can we talk?" she asked. I considered saying no. Instead, I opened the door. She sat across from me and stared at the floor. "I was scared," she said. I remained silent. "Marcus told me your company was going to collapse. He said you would lose everything. He promised me that if I stayed with him, I would be protected." I looked at her. "So you chose him?" Tears appeared in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting myself." "You were." She looked surprised. "But you weren't protecting us," I continued. She lowered her head. "I know." I walked toward the window. "Why didn't you just leave me?" I asked. "Why did you help them?" She wiped her eyes. "Because I was afraid of becoming poor. I was afraid of losing the life I had." I turned around. "And you thought destroying mine was the answer?" She didn't defend herself. "Yes." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I had expected. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it carefully. "No." She looked up. "Why?" "Because hate means I still care about what you do." She cried quietly. "I'm sorry." This time I believed her. But believing her didn't mean I wanted her back. I had already spent too many years trying to save something that only one person was fighting for. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "But you owe yourself the truth." She nodded. Before leaving, she stopped near the door. "Did you ever love me?" I looked at her. "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Then I'm sorry I destroyed it." I answered quietly, "So am I." She left without another word. I watched her walk down the street until she disappeared. I expected to feel sadness. Instead, I felt peace. I finally understood that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean returning. It didn't even mean accepting an apology. Sometimes forgiveness simply means deciding that another person's choices will no longer control your future. That night, I went home, made dinner, and sat alone in the quiet apartment. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel empty. Felt peaceful. A year after the wedding that never happened, my company was larger than it had ever been. But I no longer measured success by money. I cared about the people working beside me. Evelyn became a partner, and I gave her the authority to protect employees from the kind of manipulation she had once experienced. We created a system where everyone received credit for their work. We funded young architects who couldn't afford to start their careers. We opened scholarships and internships. I wanted the company to become something completely different from the business Marcus and I had once created. One afternoon, Evelyn entered my office with a familiar smile. "You got another letter." I already knew who it was from. "Marcus." She nodded. I opened it. This letter was shorter than the first. He wrote that he had finally understood something. He had spent his entire life comparing himself to me. Instead of becoming better, he had decided to take what I had. He said he now understood that the problem had never been my success. The problem had been his insecurity. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Evelyn watched me. Still no answer? No. You don't feel anything? I smiled. I feel sorry for him. She raised an eyebrow. That's different. It is. I walked toward the window. The city looked completely different from that height. Years earlier, I had looked at those same buildings and believed I had failed. Now I understood that failure wasn't losing something you trusted. Failure was allowing that loss to define you forever. I asked Evelyn, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't discovered the truth?" She thought for a moment. "You might still be married to Olivia. Maybe. Marcus might still own half the company. Probably. And you'd never know." I nodded. "That's the part that scares me." She smiled. "Then maybe everything happened for a reason." I didn't completely believe in destiny, but I believed in choices. Marcus chose betrayal. Olivia chose fear. Richard chose greed. Evelyn chose courage. And I chose not to become like them. That was the most important decision of my life. I didn't want to spend the rest of my years plotting revenge. I wanted to build something they could never take from me again. Not a company, not a house, not a bank account, a life that belonged entirely to me. I finally understood that the greatest revenge wasn't watching my enemies fall. It was waking up every morning without needing them to lose for me to feel like I had won. 5 years after receiving that wedding invitation, I returned to the same hotel where Marcus had planned to marry my wife. The building had been completely renovated. The ballroom looked different. The walls had been repainted, and the old decorations were gone. Almost nobody there knew what had happened in that room years earlier. I stood near the entrance for a few minutes, remembering the man I had been that night. I remembered the humiliation, the anger, the feeling that my entire world had collapsed in front of hundreds of strangers. I remembered seeing Olivia in her wedding dress and Marcus standing beside her. I remembered thinking that I had lost everything. But I was wrong. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost people who were willing to betray me. I had lost a company built on trust that wasn't real. I had lost a marriage that had already been broken long before the wedding invitation arrived. What remained was me, and that was enough. My phone rang. It was Evelyn. "Where are you?" she asked. "At the old hotel." She laughed. "Why are you there?" I looked around the ballroom. "I wanted to see something." "What?" I smiled. "The place where I thought my life ended." There was a pause. And I looked toward the large windows. The city lights were shining outside. I realized something. "What?" "My life didn't end here." Evelyn laughed softly. "I knew that." I walked outside. The evening air was cool, and people moved through the streets without knowing anything about my past. That felt strangely comforting. Nobody cared who Marcus was. Nobody cared what Olivia had done. Nobody cared about the company they had tried to steal. The world had moved on. So had I. I got into my car and drove through the city. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I wasn't thinking about the wedding. I wasn't thinking about the millions they had tried to steal. I was thinking about the future, about the people who trusted me now, about the employees who depended on the company, about the young architects we were helping, about Evelyn, who had become one of my closest friends. And I finally understood the lesson hidden inside the worst year of my life. People can steal your money. They can betray your trust. They can walk away from you. They can even convince you that you are worthless. But they cannot decide who you become afterward. That choice belongs to you. Marcus wanted my life because he thought success was something you could possess. Olivia wanted security because she thought happiness came from money. Richard wanted power because he believed having more meant being stronger. They were all wrong. Strength wasn't controlling other people. Strength was surviving when they were gone. I stopped at a red light and smiled. 5 years earlier, I had received a wedding invitation that destroyed everything I believed about the people closest to me. I thought it was the worst day of my life. Now I knew it was the day my real life began. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's becoming someone they can never reach again.